everybody, I am Jared Ross, the Genie Vlogger, and welcome back to another video where I review your DNA and genealogy questions. If you have questions you'd like me to answer in a video like this, be sure to go to my subreddit r/GenieVlogger and post your questions there. There is a long queue of people that I have to get to, and some of these questions are starting to range to almost a year ago. So it does take me a while to get to this stuff because there's just a lot of questions people have. But let's jump into it. I'm confused about my DNA results. I took an Ancestry DNA test. My grandfather is biracial, black and white. Both of my parents are black, so how am I 30% white? Now, this is common for anyone who's of African American descent, and especially knowing that your grandfather was biracial, which I'm assuming you mean that he had a parent who was 100% European. This just plays up to the history in the US with slavery and the fact that there were a lot of slaves who were raped by their slave masters or overseers or other people, and then they had children who were of mixed race. And on top of that, there were consensual relationships between people who were black and white, ranging from before emancipation to well into the 1900s, and obviously today as well. So it's very common for people who are African American to have about 25% European ancestry when they do these DNA tests. Now, I have seen some comments from past videos where we talk about African American DNA testing and that 25% percentage, and I have heard arguments that the 25% percentage is a little bit higher and that some people feel that it's more like 10 or 15%, which it certainly is possible. I think it'd be an interesting thing to look into and study because it would be good to kind of have a general idea. So when you do these admixtures and you do see a higher percentage of European, it might be indicative of a more recent ancestor that was fully European as opposed to something that dated back to pre-emancipation. On to the next one. DNA result leaves me scratching my head. Of my 32 third great grandparents, 14 born in Ireland and 2 probably born in Ireland, 8 born in Wales, 4 born in England, and 4 probably born in England. So I was expecting an admix of approximately 50% Irish, 25% Welsh, and the rest being English, Northwestern Europe, France, Germanic, etc. For those lines, I have been able to go back further. The country of birth has been consistent, i.e. third great grandparents born in England, then previous ancestors were born in England, likewise for Ireland and Wales. So I have no clue where the Scottish, Norwegian, and Scandinavian comes from. And then following a comment by Echidna, whatever. I uploaded my file to find my past and got different results, see images. And being that Echidna said some sort of comment that got the poster to post their find my past results as well, I figured I'd read the comment because it's actually a really good comment in explaining this. I wouldn't read anything into the Scottish and Scandinavian. Ancestry gets a lot of flack for how sensitive their Scottish reading is. Also, pretty much everyone with Anglo-Irish ancestry receives Scandinavian ancestry. My mom has it, most of her relatives do too. I, however, don't have any, even though I actually do have some Danish ancestry some way back. She has no recent Scandinavian ancestry at all. You have to remember these tests are almost like a survey. It sort of shows what genes you have in common for people on that area. It doesn't always mean you have actual ancestry there, it just means you hold genes in common. So it could be a reading from Viking ancestry or just a general Northern European ancestry that goes back even further. And this is something that we harp on a lot in these videos and a lot of the questions I answer, and luckily they've kind of dwindled down a lot of the Northeastern European questions, especially because this is a super common question for anyone that has English, Irish, Welsh, Scottish, whatever results often gets lumped together. So you get a lot of that Scandinavian in there, you get a lot of the British Isles stuff, you get some of the French, you get some of the Germanic, depending on how the companies define it. You may get low country readings. I'm trying to remember if any actually do define those like that. And then, you may get little percentages of other stuff, but it's not uncommon for someone where they have a family tree that's traced back hundreds of years on almost every single line, and all they can find is stuff in the British Isles, in Ireland, or England, or Wales, or Scotland, or whatever, and then they get these readings of Scandinavian. And it's just a super, super common thing because there are so many genes in common, and the difficulty of these tests and reading them, they're not perfect, they're just estimations. So it makes it a lot harder and they get a lot of that confused. as time goes on, hopefully they can be better and better at actually reading these on a higher scale. But I just realized we haven't even looked at their results. So let's look at their DNA results. So first we have Ancestry with Ireland at 59%, Wales 25%, Scotland 7%, Norway 7%, Sweden and Denmark 7%, which actually it fits pretty well with what they had said, except for the, Scotland, Norway, and Sweden and Denmark, I think, seem to represent the English that they had. But I think they'd said they expected about 50% Irish. So we do see the communities as well. Munster, Ireland, North Munster, North Tipperary, nothing else for the other ones. All right, now looking at the living DNA results, which living DNA does give the most granular results, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're the most accurate. They're just taking a much more specific guess with their guesses. And we see that it breaks down 66% Ireland, 15.4% North Wales, 6.7% South Wales, 5.6% South Central England, 1.6% East Anglia, 1.3% Southeast England, 1.1% Orkney and Shetland Islands, 1.1% South Wales border, and then 1.3% Northwest Germanic. Probably just really, yeah, I think that's what this big purple blotch is. Just a big clunk with Denmark and Germany and Netherlands and Belgium kind of just all thrown in there. And then here we have the comparison, which, yeah, they're very different. 59% to 66%. So yeah, living DNA, they get much more granular. They're not giving you any of that Sweden, any of the Scandinavian stuff. You did say that you do have some Denmark in you, which is coming up in the Ancestry, so maybe that is, what it's representing. But it is interesting that living DNA has a higher percentage on the Irish when you were expecting, what was it, 50%? Yeah, 50%. So in a way, living DNA is kind of off a bit more than the Ancestry is, because 50% Irish, 25% Welsh, and the rest English, Northwestern Europe, whatever. And then when you look at it, not 50% Irish, but 59%, then 25% Wales, and then Scotland, Norway, Sweden, and Denmark. But I guess, that's just the difficulty. But it's just kind of interesting that it is a little bit closer, although living DNA is very close. I mean, it's really the important one is the Welsh really coming in so close on both. The Irish obviously being a little bit further off. And then with this, the mixture seemingly matching up a bit better instead of, Scotland, Norway, Sweden, and Denmark. But at this point, it's just really doing that nitpicky thing of, well, this one's a little bit closer to what I expect in that sense, but in the other sense, it's not quite as close. And so that's what you get with these admixture results. So it'd be interesting to see what you get with some of these other DNA companies. I'm sure if you took MyHeritage, you'll see a fairly different thing. But that seems to be the one that most people dislike, that has Northwestern European, basically people with Northwestern European do MyHeritage, and the readings don't seem to match up with what they have in their tree. Hopefully that answers it for you, but based on your response to Equal Echidna's comment, it seems like you basically got the concept. And I think the coolest thing is that you note that while they didn't exactly match up when you looked at your matches, which is the most important thing, it actually helped you break a brick wall in your family tree. And I think it goes to show that no matter how much you harp on the little differences in percentages of the different companies, the thing that really matters when it comes to these DNA tests is your matches and being able to use that to expand the tree and break down brick walls. Let's jump to the next one. DNA matches. How likely is it that DNA matches on Ancestry could be wrong? I have 2 DNA matches that are all matched to my paternal grandfather's side of the family. However, they are also a match to one person who is associated with my paternal grandmother. Both my father and I have done our DNA. The match on my paternal grandmother's side is 2% shared DNA, 149 centimorgans across 4 segments. While the 2 on my paternal grandfather's side, who do share the same last name, are less than 1% shared DNA, 44 centimorgans across 3 segments, and less than 1% shared DNA, 57 centimorgans across 4 segments. All these numbers are through my dad's DNA. My match and numbers are lower, of course. The paternal grandfather's ancestors that these 2 seem to match came to the US from England as part of the Mormon migration in the late 1800s, I've not been able to locate them on my family tree. The match on my paternal grandmother's side is located on my tree. She's descended from one of my grandmother's aunts. I guess my question is it more likely that somehow these three people are related through some other ancestor, and if I do enough work on their trees, would I find it, or is it possible this is a mistake? Well, there are a few things happening. One could be that this person is related to those other two matches through some other line of theirs, and because of that, they're going to match as well, but even though they aren't related to you through the same lines of your family, they're still going to come up as shared matches because you match them and then the others match them as well. This is an extremely common issue for people who come from an endogamous population, such as Jews, French Canadians, and a whole bunch of different islander populations as well. And what happens is when you come from an endogamous population, everyone within that population is basically related to each other in different ways. A lot of times there's what's known as double relations, where you'll be related to someone through multiple lines of your family. Let's say you have a pair of sisters and they meet some guys and they're brothers. One sister marries one of the guys, the other sister marries the other guy. Any children they have are going to be related through both the mom and the father's side. So their children would be known as a double first cousin because they're first cousins through their mom's side and first cousins through their dad's side. But this can happen on much more distant levels. Let's say that you go to your cousin's wedding, right? And then you meet a cousin of theirs on the other side of their family and you fall in love and then have kids. Well, your kids are going to be related to their kids in multiple ways. And this is just kind of the simple versions, I guess, but when you really think about it on a much more distant level, especially hundreds of years back, and you're talking about 44 centimorgan matches, really low, much more distant, fourth, fifth cousins, I really don't think it's that surprising of a thing to happen. And especially if she ends up descending from a similar sort of migration, even though that might not be your shared relation. So for the one cousins, you said that they came from England with the Mormon migration, but then you don't mention for the other relative where that side of your family came from. So if your paternal grandmother's side of the family also had some sort of US to England Mormon migration route, it is very possible that maybe she has that as well, and that's what's happening with the relation is you're all just kind of coming from that same community, and there's probably a lot of people within that community related to each other in multiple ways. But now with all that said, there is also a possibility that this is some sort of error. When you're looking at the shared matches, especially on Ancestry, yeah, you say you took it on Ancestry. Ancestry has the worst shared match information out of all of the companies, except for maybe Family Tree DNA, but that's kind of arguable. Yeah, maybe Family Tree DNA is technically a bit worse on their shared matches stuff. But basically, when it comes to the shared matches, you don't get much information. So even though you're saying that they are sharing, shared matches to each other, you don't get to see how much DNA are they sharing with each other. You know how much you're sharing with each one of those matches, but those two matches on your paternal grandfather's side, what's their shared amount with that cousin on your paternal grandmother's side? And if you find out, and that's 9 centimorgans or something, that's really, really low, and there's a high possibility that's a false positive match. And yes, these DNA tests can have false positive matches. When you're dealing with matches that come from endogamous populations, the issues with that endogamy can cause a higher amount of false positive matches. Another thing could be is that when you're dealing with matches that are a low amount of DNA shared, there is a higher possibility of that being a false positive. So in a sense, it is possible that Ancestry DNA is wrong, but there is also a very realistic possibility that these relatives of yours are just related in another way. On to the next one. Forever alone, when you've got no connections to the world tree on Genie. Oh, those poor, poor people. I don't know what that's like, although I've built trees for some people where it took a while to get them connected. And it's very unfortunate when you find connections and it's only through marriages, which it's great that you then connect to the world tree, but it's so much fun when you're able to connect to it and have deep ancestral lines that then you can see like, oh, I'm 23rd cousins with this person and I'm 19th cousins with this person. And, George Washington was my 19th cousin 6 times removed and that kind of stuff. So, yes, kind of sad. On to the next one. Drawing conclusions from haplogroups. I did a 23andMe test a couple years back, but only just looked at my haplogroups. I've spent a couple of days reading about it and was wondering how to look at them. And then they reference their haplogroups R1A1, A1, B1, A2, B3, and H1C3, which, yeah, I forgot what that one is, but that's like an older one that's not used as much. The R1A1B, like you'll see that. I guess 23andMe gives it that way, but I'll pull it up and show you. There's actually another name for your haplogroup. 23andMe ethnicity results, about 60% Balkan, mostly in Bosnia, some in Croatia, and a little in West Serbia, and about 40% East Europe with no in-depth results. Both of my families are from Bosnia, but I don't know anything beyond my grandparents. Which means that you really don't know a lot, and it's a lot of questions of what you could expect, because your grandparents all could have come from elsewhere. You know, I mean, I doubt it. You know, it sounds like your DNA is matching up with being in the Balkans, but still. I've looked at both SNP tracker and percentages of the haplogroups per country on Wikipedia. I have to scroll down about 10 countries to even get to Croatia, and even less for Bosnia or Serbia for my paternal haplogroup, but I don't know how to interpret this. Any insight is greatly appreciated. Well, this is something that unfortunately there's not going to be much that you can glean off of genealogically, most especially a basic haplogroup such as what 23andMe gives you. Now, if you wanted to get further into your paternal and maternal stuff and actually use it genealogically, then what you'll want to do is either do one of the specialty tests with family tree DNA, so either their Y test or their mitochondrial test, or both, or you can do a whole genome sequence such as Nebula and then use those results to upload to other websites like YFull and whatnot to get your matches. But with just the basic haplogroup, there's not much that you can get from it other than understanding, okay, my paternal haplogroup traced up a couple of thousand years and then trace it back down again, and then these are the countries where you're going to find the people with that haplogroup. Basically meaning that you all share a paternal ancestor 2,000 to 3,000 years ago. So another way to say it is that this guy 2,000 to 3,000 years ago, where do all of his descendants live? Right off the bat with the Y-DNA, the fact that you're R1A is super, super common. Not quite as common, I think, as R1B is, but R1A, the R1's family is just super common. As I mentioned, it's kind of an older format, so we can just copy and just paste. And so we see R1A in all subclades, and we can see R1A CTS1211. That's probably going to be the more recent name. So you can even see someone says, hi, I'm Chinese from Central China. My result was the R1A1A1 B1A2 B3 Z280 CTS1211. Basically what this is you're looking at specific markers in the DNA. And when a specific mutation happens, all the descendants, all the paternal descendants will have that in their Y chromosome, and that's how they're able to tell. So with each new subclade that's found, basically every time you get a little bit closer in time, so you find another person that shares one more marker with you than the other ones do, they're going to be closer related because you and that person share a marker that was mutated by your common ancestor, who then has a common ancestor with the more distant ones. And so as you get further down, they keep naming it more. So there's R1, then R1A, then and so that's why these numbers get big, and then they started to change how they were. And by that, I mean shortening them, making them so that they're a little easier to read than going R1A1, B1, so they started naming the SNPs, and then a lot of times the subclade, or what's the most specific haplogroup, is called a subclade. So that subclade then gives you the most recent connection. Looking here at this group, I already took a look at this beforehand, but when we do a search, we can see here's your haplogroup, R1A1A1B1A2 B3, and this is what it's called for the other groups, RCTS3402, which basically means that all the people that descend from this haplogroup, which we can see there are further subclades, this A, A1, B, C, so you can see how that kind of goes. Each one of those has a specific SNP, a single nucleotide polymorphism, or a fancy word for a genetic marker. And so the one that you share with all of these people is this. So we're going to copy that. And now we're going to go to YFull. Now YFull, this is people that have connected their tests. So here we have the father of this group. And then it's like a family tree. So here we have that person and then this other one, and then they have further subclades and further, and then we can see the map. So usually what they suggest for the flag that you'll see here, this is where was the most distant paternal ancestor from this line that you know of. And so these are where they are. And so we can see Belarus, Poland, Russia, and so on. We can scroll through. And what often happens is you'll notice specific stuff with certain subclades. So we see here, this subclade, all of a sudden we get a bunch of Polish readings. We do have a Slovakian there, but if we scroll up, we don't quite see as many Poland. We see a few kind of scattered in there. But this indicates to me that somewhere along the lines, possibly whoever this person is, this line ended up in the areas that are now Poland. But look also here, formed about 1800 years before present. So it could be a range of 2100 to 1600 years. And they're indicating the most recent common ancestor of all the people in this subclade. So all the people that have entered their information, every time you see one of those flags, they all share an ancestor about 2400 to 1250 years ago. So that's a long, long time. And we see with each time it gets down further, so it gets a little bit closer in time. The range is still pretty big, but as we get closer and closer, it starts to get a lot better. And then we see some of the most recent ones. So these people share a ton of DNA, or a ton of their SNPs with each other. Their most recent common ancestor was 475 to 50 years ago. But as we just keep scrolling through, you could be in any one of these subclades. So all you can glean from this is that, yeah, your subclade, based on where a lot of these people are, it's often in Eastern Europe. But obviously not always, because we see here we've got Finland. So we're getting some Northern European here, but it makes sense too with the Russian. But then you also, all of a sudden, look at this. We have that Chinese there. We remember seeing that when we Googled, we saw someone from China. But there, there's all sorts of possibilities. And what it is these are just migratory paths. So all of these people descend from someone who migrated at some point, and because of that migration, a large majority of their descendants now live in another place. And so when you do a whole genome sequence test, you can upload to YFull. So Nebula even has it where you can just automatically connect it. And once you connect it, you're going to fall somewhere in these subclades. And once you have that, that's when you can glean even more information. But with just the haplogroup, there's really not much more you can do. And as for the maternal haplogroup, that one's even less that you can do with it, because maternal haplogroups, the mutation of the DNA, makes it much more difficult to be able to actually decipher in any genealogical useful way. But for anyone that's really into the idea of haplogroups and want to see more about it, be sure to check out this reaction I did to Massamann's Haplogroups of the World Map. And thank you to my patrons and YouTube members.